cambiar vidas,
change lives,
change organizations,
Change
दुनिया में
organizations.
बदलाव.
Change the world.
What I'm going to first do is just kind of set this up quickly. A lot of you are familiar with kind of the global impact and their trends, but essentially three phenomena occurring, right? Both economic, where the developed economies of established countries is intersecting with more developing economies, and I'll get into that in a second. Social demographics, there's countries that are aging and shrinking and others that are experiencing hyper growth. And then the environmental is why we're here. We spend a lot of time on that. And so just a snapshot, and giving you some backdrop, aging populations in the United States, in China, Japan, South Korea, et cetera, and shrinking populations in Germany, Russia, mostly in Europe, coupled with kind of hyper growth, right? India, obviously, and in Africa. And so it's interesting, this phenomenon is occurring, as you know, as most of the people now, more than half the world's population is being urbanized. And where is this urbanization occurring, and where are the trends and the innovations transpiring? So I just want to give you some backdrop on that. On the technology side, whole host of phenomenon happening, right? Within social networking, mobile, cloud, the Internet of Things, I'll get into in a second and talk about that a little bit. And then pervasive video. When you think about it, the brain's cortex has 30% of it is dedicated to vision. 8 and 6% is dedicated to touch and hearing. And so 60% of communication is nonverbal. So pervasive video is a key theme around how people learn, live, work, and play. And that is a trend that we're seeing as a huge momentum shifter within these smart cities, if you will. And so I mentioned the Internet of Things. What does that really mean? It's not a Cisco terminology. It's really, I think, coined by McKinsey and some others. But essentially, it's everything's going to be connected. And so if you look today, there are twice as many devices connected to the Internet as there are people. And the belief is, and the trend is going that by 2020, we'll have more than 50 billion devices connected. Devices meaning could be sensors in your automobile on your telling you what your tire gauge pressure is, to smart IDs on produce in a refrigerator that if you want to make a meal, you know what's in there and not in there, to sensors that are on water waste management systems. Everything will be connected, and the Internet is an important aspect of that. So these trends, we view, lead to smart things for smart cities. So what's a smart thing? So a little cartoon, a little joke here, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit of processing power, a smart thing, can exhibit interesting behaviors if they're networked to something else. And what we mean by that is a smart thing is less about a human being interacting with that thing. It's machine to machine. And so what's happening is sensors need to talk to other sensors with outcomes that we think will create greater efficiencies from an energy perspective to experiences on how you interact with systems. And so when we say smart things, we mean machine to machine and the network connecting the two. So if we take smart things and we go into smart cities, we've worked with Forrester and others in looking at, okay, we can have technology till technology's sake and make things really smart and efficient. But the fundamental things, I think it was discussed earlier today, was around governance and city system initiatives. And so the upper right-hand quadrant were cities that we saw that had both ingredients, both Barcelona, New York, et cetera. And they come in all shapes and sizes. And one of the phenomenon that we're seeing is smart cities are less about the large, big cities, while density is on their side, and density is very helpful in kind of adoption of new systems. The integration of disparate systems are challenging for cities that are over 10 million people or more. The sweet spot, we think, is about 100,000 to about 1 million people. Barcelona is about 1 million people. And so what we see is the adoption of smart grid, alternative energy capabilities, transportation systems in a holistic manner seems to be accelerating at a quicker pace in that 100,000 to 1 million person city or community. Not that they're not accelerating in the large cities, but they're more segmented. And so, if you have a smart city, what do you need? Well, you need a strategy. And what our experience has been on the ground is that if you have a vision and a strategy around how do you make a smart community from the beginning, those are the ones that are more successful. And what we don't coin this term, it's an industry term, is information communication technology. Technology historically has been thought about as an afterthought. And if it's an afterthought, it's a retrofit. If it's a retrofit, it's cost prohibitive, and it doesn't happen. And it's not market driven. So we fundamentally believe, and we have been successful on a lot of these communities that I'll get into in a second on proof points, is that if there's a strategy around technology to do two basic things, create efficiencies and create new revenue streams. Because if we can create efficiencies, then the developer, the equity investor, and the construction management company buy into the ability that says there's an operational savings on energy downstream, but what's more important to them is that can I reduce first costs? On the second piece is if there's an operational efficiency play and we're driving and consuming less energy, there's potentially new revenue streams, and I'll get into that in a second. So how do we respond? And I alluded to this a little bit. There isn't one stakeholder, there are multiple stakeholders. And my experience has been in working on projects in Korea and China, in Europe and Latin America, is you need people, not just one, but multiple people who have the vision around the outcome that you want to create, the strategy that I just alluded to. Global standards are critical. You can't have proprietary systems that don't talk to each other. The second is regulation. I think it was discussed earlier today. Regulation will drive a lot of this concept around smart grids and around the delivery of energy in an efficient manner that is hugely wasteful today. And I think last year you talked about public-private partnerships, but our experience is that if the government needs to be on board with private developers in the spirit of public-private partnerships for these communities to work. And lastly is an ecosystem, a new ecosystem. Who'd have thought that IBM or Cisco or any other technology companies would really be relevant in urbanization? And what we think is technology is a key catalyst to driving energy consumption down and efficiencies up in these developing communities. So I'm going quickly here, and the reason I was given 20 minutes, so I'm going to race through this in a second, then I'll get to the proof points. But why did Cisco get into this? Why Cisco is involved in this? And back with President Clinton on the Clinton Global Initiative, the challenge was carbon reduction. That was kind of the challenge, and Cisco is looking at its portfolio of its product solutions and ecosystem to complement that around directly, indirectly, and systemically affecting that. And what has happened is we've taken that initiative from 2006, 2008, and we've embarked on really a campaign that we call Smart Connected Communities. And it's a practice that I'm a part of and run around focusing on the three key tenets around social, environmental, and economic sustainability. And what is interesting is if you don't get the economics right, and I think it was discussed before, if it's not market driven, the environmental capabilities that we have as technologists and as city planners around the globe will never be realized. And the outcome that you really want to create is a social environment that promotes inclusion, entrepreneurship, new business models, new revenue streams. But you'll never get there if you can't get past the first piece, which is the economic play. And when you might say, well, what is a service? And actually, if you got an economic play, what are you actually delivering? And what Cisco looks at is two basic areas. One is, you hear a lot of things about a cloud. A cloud is nothing more than a big data center or a collection of technology and componentry that sits in a data center cloud somewhere. And we call that the community exchange, a common fabric of an open standard to facilitate these kinds of these technologies. And then the outcome, which is really around a Community Connect offering. And the best analogy I can give you is if you look at kind of the structure or the framework that we talk about, I won't go through this slide. The easiest way to describe it is, foundationally, I think of an iPhone as a platform, right? So an iPhone is a platform, and foundationally a network is a platform. And then there's an app store by which is open to third-party developers to develop applications and services. And so that app store is kind of the middle layer, and Cisco's developing a service delivery platform by which third-party developers can build applications and services that you might want to consume for different experiences. And so our belief is that if there's a foundational layer with this software intelligence, and we're working closely with IBM on a lot of this work, then we'll deliver outcomes we can create new revenue streams that get people on board with looking at alternative ways of producing, delivering, and disseminating energy as an example. So the financial modeling is critical. And so what Cisco's done is we have put together a framework and an approach in a small consulting practice. Whether it's done by us or others, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is if you have a plan, it needs to be driven by a financial model around a community in a holistic manner. And if you can't show a return on any kind of investment, whether that is public or private investments, the project usually never goes anywhere. And so we look at this as a phenomenal opportunity, because if you look at a building, what is it, 50% of the world's population is urbanized, 75% of the world's energy is consumed by cities, 40% of which is consumed by buildings that are only 40% efficient. So ours is less of a game around, from our vantage point, around developing new ways of consuming energy. It's around an efficiency play. How do we get disparate systems to talk to one another? And so with the exception of life's, fire alarm safety systems that they need to be dedicated, these other systems, there's no reason why they should not be connecting and talking to one another. So we can reduce first costs and create greater efficiencies and consume less energy while offering a platform for new kinds of services. So some of the proof points, and I'll slow down on this piece. On the proof points, we break this into very targeted areas, case studies around Cisco on Cisco, or finite or very distinct kind of opportunities such as stadiums around the planet, to greenfield developments, to revitalizations. And we have a whole host of proof points. I'll dive into about 3 or 4 of them. And one in particular is in Amsterdam and in South Korea, this concept of smart work centers. And so this concept was really born by the traffic congestion in Amsterdam. And rather than commute to compute, you want to go to places where you're collaborating with your colleagues and other constituents to conduct business. And so we formulated a strategy that created these basically smart work centers that have immersive video, pervasive technology that will allow individuals to work in a more collaborative way without having to travel halfway across town. South Korea's picked up on this, and they're actually deploying 500 of these. And the lessons learned was it's just not about work, but it's also around incubation, collaboration, and community centers. And so they've expanded the strategy to do not just that, but also how to fuse the new developments in the Incheon area with the existing developments in the broader South Korea area. So Songdo, South Korea, project I've been intimately involved with. 1,500 acres of reclaimed land from the ground up. So the asset is you've got virgin land. The challenge is you have virgin land. So this has been a 10-year project. We've been involved with it for the last 5 years. It's a little over 30% complete, almost 50% complete. And I would say that the lessons learned there is that have a plan and a strategy and an execution around sustainability. Cogeneration is delivering the energy throughout the community. They have a pneumatic waste system. There's no garbage trucks on the streets. So pneumatic waste is pulled into vacuum tubes under the community and the city. Renewables on water waste management. So they reclaim about 70% of the rainwater and put it back into irrigation. There's a whole host of different sustainability approaches that they've taken that have been quite successful. And location is key. They are located 15 minutes from the Incheon airport that can get to 1/3 of the world's population in a 3-hour flight. So the goal here, the theme for this community is how do I get foreign investment to take up space in this community such that this could potentially be the new gateway to the east from a Northeast Asia perspective. And I would say the lessons learned have been working closely with the government and the private developer, Gale International and POSCO E&C, is that the free economic zone incentives to have corporations come here were not fully solidified and I think are still developing. So I think if the government could have worked more collaboratively with really outlining that quicker, you would probably get more corporations coming. They are now, but it's taken some time. Barcelona, another project that, again, what they have done is a revitalization project where they have taken existing systems and connected them, both transportation and energy. And what the lessons learned on this one is they're taking their lessons learned, packaging them up and creating a separate entity to export this knowledge. And export this knowledge in a fee-based consulting arrangement, and it's basically a government entity that's been set up as a special purpose vehicle by which to create revenue for Barcelona. I have two more and then I'll wrap up. Here in the United States, Chicago Lakeside is a project that we've been involved with that is 600 acres, 8 miles south of Chicago on Lake Michigan. It used to be a U.S. steel plant, and when they closed the plant, 30,000 jobs were lost. What I would say the lessons learned on this project is the developer, McCaffrey Interest, has done a phenomenal job of including experts around water waste management, energy, transportation, technology, and have engaged us in a very robust manner with the urban planning design firm Skidmore, Owings, Merrill, who are looking at innovative ways to drive energy consumption down and the ability to use water in a more meaningful way. The idea is for not just to implement these technologies, but actually through Argonne National Labs and others to create a living lab in this community to test out these kinds of new technologies as we speak. And the last one is Skolkovo outside of Moscow. And what they are doing is they are leveraging a lot of expertise in the energy space. And yes, some of that energy is nuclear, some of it is biomass, et cetera. And what we're finding is that they're trying to take their assets around energy and create really an incubation or an innovation hub around energy consumption. And what's interesting is Cisco has worked very closely with them to provide the communications infrastructure for the delivery of really that innovation hub, if you will. I lied, this is the last one. So the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York City has taken a very surgical approach in transportation systems and looked at delivering basically wayfinding capabilities through information kiosks, right? And so to navigate through the New York City subway system can be challenging for a visitor, and these have been hugely successful such that they are starting to connect to other systems such as the bus, such as the traffic systems, et cetera, throughout the New York City area. And the only thing that I would share with you at the end of this is, and I gave you a snippet of some of the proof points, some of our experiences, that innovation's key. It's an overused word, but it can't be pushed aside. So the quote is that if you can't read it, says, your proposal is innovative. Unfortunately, we won't be able to use it because we've never tried something like that before. You've got to try new things, think different. I'm stealing this from Apple, but the idea is around aligning with the key stakeholders, looking at these concepts of living labs and communities, because we don't have all the answers. We have some of the answers, and evolve our thinking as we go. So I just wanted to share some of my perspectives with you. Hopefully that was helpful.
What percent of the world population is in that sweet spot you described of size of cities?
Oh, as far as the medium size?
Yeah, right.
So our estimation is about 1/3 of the world's population is in that sweet spot. And so what we have found and it's focused on is that, not that we've been looking at the big cities, but that about 1/3 of the world's population is in that sweet spot.
Cambiar vidas,
Change lives.
change organizations,
Yeah.
Change
दुनिया में
organizations.
बदलाव.
Change the world.